Hello and welcome to the iCast. Joining me tonight is John,
Hello.
Jim,
Hello, everybody.
and Clarke.
Whoa.
So this is our second episode, and unfortunately, we had a couple of very big artists pass away in the recent weeks, and we thought we'd do just a little discussion, kind of talking about their life and their art. And obviously, the two artists I'm referring to is Neal Adams, who passed away a while ago, and then George Perez, who just passed away, I think, 2 weeks ago, a week ago. For George, I know it was kind of expected. He had been sick for a while, but it's still very sad. He's very young. He's like, I think, 6 years younger than my dad. So very young, very tragic. Both really, really great artists, but I think in very different ways. Like you definitely wouldn't get their art styles mixed up with one another. But still, two of the greatest in the industry and been around for a long time. So I think we're going to start off with John, and he's going to start off talking about Neal Adams.
Sure. The information that I took is from the New York Times obituary, and Neal was born June 15th, 1941 in Grover Island, New York. He was an Army brat. He said that he moved around quite a bit at a very early age around the East Coast. And his mother was the one that signed him up for art school. And it was originally called the High School of Art and Design, which was later named to the School of Industrial of Art. And after graduation, he did a lot of different works commercially. He did apply at DC Comics, but they turned him down right away because his style did not meet what they were currently doing. His first publication in comics didn't come from DC or Marvel or anything like that. It was actually with Archie Comics, and he had one panel in The Adventures of the Fly #4, 1960. And apparently the editor at that time saw an error in the panel, and he just asked this newbie kid to make the corrections for it. Later, he was hired to do Bat Masterson comics, which I shouldn't say comics, but it's a comic strip. And this is where he said that he really learned the trade in meeting deadlines, trying to keep things sharp, crisp, as well as strengthening his freehand abilities. His first real work for DC came about with Jerry Lewis Comics and the reason why he got the work there was that Carmen Infantino had become the main editor, and he was seeing what Marvel was doing and how Marvel was doing stuff, and realized that they needed to make a change. And so that was kind of his big break then, with the basic influences of with DC. Just a little bit of tally here. He did 133 issues for DC and 40 issues for various issues of comics for Marvel. For cover art, he did 363 for DC, and let's see, 35 for Marvel. But in the article, they talked too that when he left comics, he already started continuity. I believe it's continuity. Is that, yeah, continuity, yeah. And he did a lot of advertisement and for other companies and freelance work and things like that. And that's really where he really made a lot of money, and also improved his standing within the industry too. big things to note too was there were two attempts that he really made to get a union, or they called it a guild of for artists and creators, and people would listen and they would say, yes, we'll sign up, but then the companies would put a kibosh on all that by saying, there's younger and cheaper guys that'll work for half your wages, so forget about it. But again, just even attempting those things, he also worked diligently on writers and artists' rights, and was influential in getting the original artwork back to the artists, as well as getting a good deal in from DC for Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel. Just a real powerhouse behind that.
Hey, John, can I ask something on that? Because this is something that I kind of find fascinating, because in today, and Clarke will definitely be able to tell us more about this. I think most artists kind of take for granted the fact that they can sell their pages, on their own and not have to worry about the company keeping them. But that's the way it was. When exactly did that start changing? When did the company start allowing artists to keep their artwork?
Give me a second here. I have that.
Or Clarke, if you know offhand.
He started pushing for it in 71, and then it looks like it's in 78.
Okay.
Is when they started doing that. I do remember that Jack Kirby was very happy about that too, as well as were others. But that's in the article that I had. That's what they said, or they'd identified.
So I show obviously Detective Comics and Batman were kind of his biggest books that he contributed to. According to mine, the original Detective Comics he did 40 issues of, and Batman did 39 issues of, as well as obviously a lot of different spin-offs. What are your guys' memories of his Batman runs?
My first one has to be with the introduction of Ra's al Ghul and the giant-sized Treasury edition there behind Jim. That was my first real introduction to Neal Adams, or being able to identify him, and just being wowed by it. I had never seen artwork like that before, and some people call it photorealistic, but again, that's not the correct term for it, but it's more realistic, especially at the time when you think of artists at DC such as Kurt Swan, or that did Superman, and I can't remember who was doing Batman prior to that, where it was more cartoony. But anyway, the artwork and everything just blew me away, and it still does. It's just some amazing stuff. And so that was my first experience with it. And what's terrible is I really didn't start collecting his covers or his work until just before COVID started, and had been on a big search to get all the X-Men books that he did, that as well as the first appearance of Ra's al Ghul. But those were big searches, and again, that's how much of an influence it is. I meant I had to wait until I had the money to be able to do it.
Not cheap books.
No.
Clarke, what about you? Kind of starting off, with Neal's stuff on Batman, and then just kind of expanding out to other, experiences you had with him, or memories you have about him. Clarke?
What?
I said Clarke. Sort of talking about Neal's runs on Batman, and then kind of expanding out. What are your memories and sort of experiences?
I remember the first time that I experienced or got to know Neal's work These two right here, World's Finest, 175 and 176. These are the actual copies that I actually bought off the rack at Hoover Drugstore in Dallas Center. Buried behind the Harveys and the Archie comic books, all the way to the back of the spinner rack, were these two copies of Batman Superman, World's Finest. And I still have them. And most of the other stuff that I've gotten from Neal's, I picked up from different places. Those were the first times I saw his work. And like with John, I really was like impressed with how different it looked. It didn't have that slightly cartoony look to the artwork.
Do you feel like his art style influenced the way you draw?
Yeah, it did. It kind of got me into wanting to do superhero type comic book type stuff. Yeah.
Can you think of like a specific panel or anything like that that you felt was really jumped out at you?
I know other people have mentioned this one too, but it's from, I was trying to find it here, from the Avengers series, the This Way Something Inhuman Comes. It's the shot of Triton coming out of the water on the dock.
Is that like the beginning, towards the beginning of the Kree Skrull War, I think?
I believe so, yeah.
Well, it's more towards the end,
Oh, okay.
Okay.
right? Because everything was the lead up to that with where they fought Ronan the Accuser and that. So that's kind of where it culminated.
So Clarke, what would you say is your favorite? Like, if you think of like, if somebody wanted to get into Neal's art, what would you recommend? This is what you have to read first. Sorry, I'll say it again. If you were going to recommend somebody to get into Neal's work, like somebody that hadn't been into it before, what would be like the thing you have to read, or you would suggest reading first?
Were you talking at me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because I lost the picture. I lost everything.
Oh,
Well, we can
I don't
see
know
you.
what happened.
We can see and hear you. Okay.
Okay. I'm not quite sure where everybody went.
We're hiding. No, I was just asking. So if somebody was going to get into Neal's work that hadn't been into it before, what book do you think you'd like recommend that this is what you should start off with?
I would start off probably going a little bit past his earlier stuff. If you really wanted to get into the good stuff, you needed to grab the Batman issues and things like that, where he was really the Ra's al Ghuls and the stuff when he worked with Dick Giordano a lot. That would be a really good thing to do. If you really wanted to see some of Neal's really good photorealistic stuff, you could get your hands on any of the Ben Casey comic strips. That stuff was absolutely would floor you with how well he rendered the characters and everything from the TV series.
you know, I forgot to look it up. I don't even know if those have been reprinted or reproduced. Those Ben Casey stuff. I've seen pictures from like I think it was Heritage, you know, from years ago of some auction items of that, but
I don't know how much has been reprinted. If you go to the Wikipedia page, which I've been kind of looking at a little bit as we're talking, it does have, there's one three panel strip there. And it is very good looking. It's interesting how you can see artists that have very different art styles and yet love both of them, even though they're completely different. Jim, why don't we move on to you? So Batman is kind of what we've been talking. Is that sort of where you got into Neal Adams?
Yeah, so I think when I first really started collecting comics, I was past Neal's time. But when I very first started reading comics, sounds strange, but I read a lot of stuff at the library, which why a library would have comics is beyond me, because they just fell apart. But
oh, I remember reading comics at the library. I don't think that's strange.
So I got a lot of stuff from the Perry library, and they had a lot of stuff on record. So kind of in the 70s, they did a lot of just records with comic book stories, and they did comic books that came with records. And there were some of those that had Neal's work. And I think I would say in retrospect, a lot of the other ones by that point were influenced by Neal's work. So the artwork was much more realistic. A lot of the stories were, had a tinge of creepiness to them. Wasn't the 1960s, camp Batman style of comics. And I love that style of artwork. I always have. And I love just a hint of creepiness to the stories. One of the other things that I was going to note, because we were just talking about Ben Casey, I was not aware of that. And some of the things that I read made me really think that was kind of his first foray into relevance, which is, really made famous with the Green Lantern, Green Arrow run, where they powered down Green Lantern, and they had a whole story arc where they were doing social justice issues. But looking back to like 1963, I think it was, when he was doing Ben Casey, they were doing a lot of that on the comic strip. They were dealing with all sorts of social issues. So that was surprising to me, especially that it was like a syndicated newspaper comic that they would be able to do that. John also brought up Neal's push for workers' rights for the artists. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is that when Neal was working on the Avengers and the X-Men at Marvel, he wasn't just working for Marvel. He was a contractor for DC, and he started contracting for Marvel. And he knew it pissed people off at DC, but he said he thought it was important to kind of put a shot across the bow. Like, if you're going to have independent contractors, then they're independent contractors, and they don't just have to work. They don't have to work just for you. And that he was doing it for everyone, not just for himself. So I don't know how many other people followed his example. I think you probably had to feel pretty secure to do something like that. But I thought that was interesting.
Well, I think he was probably in a position where he was just good enough that he could, and then they're not, they're not going to fire him because they can't, or they wouldn't feel comfortable firing him because somebody else would hire him for an exclusive deal very quickly. I'm glad you brought up the Green Lantern, Green Arrow, because that's probably what I know him the most for. I thought that run was really cool, and it was, I mean, both the art and the writing was just like, you read that and it's like, wait a minute, this is a old superhero comic. This doesn't seem like the sort of black and white, good versus evil kind of thing. It seemed like it was going deeper, and I think his artwork being so realistic very much supported that kind of storytelling. And the other thing, and I mentioned this, when we were talking about the Avengers in the 70s, one of my favorite juxtapositions is in the Kree-Skrull War and the lead up to it, and throughout the Kree-Skrull War, you had a transition from John Buscema's art, who I am a unabashed lover of, into Neil Adams' art. And it's funny because I love both of them, and yet they're absolutely, totally, and completely different art. I mean, they almost could not be any more different the way they drew those books. And I love both of them. And they both just very much have their own kind of mark on the way they drew those characters. Clarke, could you talk maybe a little more about, just from an artist perspective, like, what did you think, when you first started seeing his art and it sort of being so much different? Like, what did that influence you? Like, how did you want to draw like that? Did you want to just kind of draw off that and do something different, or what was your experience with that?
when I got into his artwork and stuff like that, I like the way he posed the figures, his body anatomy. It was more like it looked like what real musculature looked like. It was more, his faces were more realistic, even though there was that extreme dynamics to them. It was just, he kind of pulled you into the story with his artwork, and it was like you were there rather than you were just kind of like watching a Saturday morning cartoon or something. He really, he just had a way of rendering and drawing people and doing, because you could find yourself doing, when he would have people with their arms like this thing, they'd be saying like, oh yeah, I remember I used to do that when I was like, oh man. And he'd do that same kind of pose, because you found out that he was like the other guys like Frazetta and Williamson and Roy Crinkle and those guys back then in the 50s and the 60s. They did a lot of posing for each other and took photographs to get that realistic looking pose and everything, and what a person really looks like when they're standing there and the way their clothes drape. And so it was that kind of stuff. And then I learned more about that when I went to art school.
Yeah, you kind of sort of picture, the a prototypical kind of simplistic comic book artist, like superhero stands with, fists on hips with cape blowing in one, and just kind of like very, it almost get a sense of staticness, I guess. Whereas I think like just the one that's behind Jen, that cover, it sort of, it suggests motion. It suggests like sort of a dynamic nature where there's something happening in the panel. I was trying to go through and find some of the other stuff, because I think we could talk about a lot of the stuff that people know about, but he's also done a lot of sort of stuff you haven't heard of. One of the ones that I came up with that I was looking at both for George Perez and Neal Adams was Deadly Hands of Kung Fu. And that's this book that came out, and like I was going through the creators list on this book, and we were kind of talking about before we started recording, that just has tons and tons of creators. I mean, issue 1 lists the creative team as Al Milgram, Dick Giordano, Jerry Conway, Neal Adams, Steve Englehart, Jim Starlin, Marv Wolfman, and Roy Thomas. And you just think, wow, those people all worked on that one book that I never really heard about before. So I don't know, could you guys think of any other books that you've seen his art in that were maybe not sort of the mainstream, mainline books that you kind of remember or were impressed by?
Something that kind of came up when I was looking too is all that he did for National Lampoon throughout most of the 70s. And I always thought of, and again, I was early, no, I wasn't even teens yet, but I remember my uncle having National Lampoons, and think of it was like the Playboy version of Mad, if that makes sense. And seeing his artwork and still being able to recognize it, but then still couldn't believe that he was doing stuff in that. But again, satire, activism. Again, I didn't think about the activism till just now, but that's what he was doing, or he's continued to do. There was something else. Oh, I guess I want to say his continuity stuff. I was an adult.
I was actually just going to bring that up. Megalith.
Yeah. Man. So I was in the military at that time, and there was a comic book store. It's like one of the first ones I'd ever been to, was right off base, and they had all those. And I just couldn't believe it. It was like great stories, Neal Adams artwork, but then I found out, wait a minute, he actually didn't draw all of these. But yeah, but still great stuff. And again, to me, again, he was kind of pushing the boundaries again with being independent or trying to be independent.
Well, I'm just kind of looking at, and I have not read any of this. Did you guys read a lot of those books? Megalith is the one that I'm kind of coming up with. But I know there was others, and I think there was more than one version of that too.
Yes. Armor and I forgot what
Cyber Rad.
Streak,
Silver Streak is
Toy Boy,
Jason.
Crazy Man.
Yeah, did he do Zero Patrol, or was that reprint?
Dorado originally did Zero Patrol.
Okay.
And then Neal reprinted it through continuity and went in and fixed up some of the artwork. I think some of it might not have been in good shape, but
Yeah, I was just looking at it's so it looks on Zero Patrol. He's credited at least as being the cover artist. So maybe when he re-released them, they did new cover art or something like that. That's just me kind of.
I remember the interior. I could see him in the interior artwork. From when I think about that.
But the one thing, so just kind of looking at these, the covers for Megalith, they really have some really interesting covers. Like they're very, I mean, super detailed. I mean, it's very much his style. But if you get a chance, look at that Megalith issue 1. It's the main guy's holding up this ceiling, and it's just very kind of like you said, photorealistic isn't exactly the right term. It doesn't look photorealistic. It looks like visceral. It looks like visceral realism, if that's a word. Kind of like whether or not it looks like real, it feels real. And I like that cover a lot. I think that's a really good cover.
And then of course Ms. Mystic, the whole idea behind that was great. And again, there were touches of her costume that always made me think of Havoc of the X-Men. And I think it was just because of it was black, but then there were like
these plus she has white hair too. Yeah.
So. But her costume, it seemed like there was like white or light things that kind of moved around or
and you'll use zip tone a lot to the from the black all the way to the really light gray zip tone, and he'd move it depending on what kind of effect he wanted with the costume.
What's zip tone? I've never heard of that.
Pardon me?
What's zip tone? I've never heard that term before.
Zip tone was a part of the Pantone system way back when I was in art school in the 80s. You could get these film sheets that was solid one color, or you could get zip tones which came in cool patterns, shading effects, and you could just cut it with an X-Acto knife and stick it down exactly where you wanted it at. Now they don't use such a thing now because all the coloring is done on computers and stuff. But back then, that's how guys would do. Some people, instead of doing all the cross hatching, would use the zip tone for shading effects.
Well, I was going to say, I asked that because looking at the cover art for her costume looks kind of like unique. Like it doesn't look, and I wonder if maybe that was what he was doing.
Yeah. And then
because her costume is very uniquely shaded. It has kind of a strange shading to it.
And then her headpiece were these like metal coils. I don't even know if that's the right way to describe it. But again, yes.
Yeah. So do you think that's what that is?
That's zip tone.
Yeah, that zip tone is the gradation effect that goes from the dark down to the light.
It's very eye-catching. Like you kind of your eyes kind of drawn to it.
Who did that cover?
I think he did.
Who did that cover, Clarke?
Who did this cover? Yeah. Shameless self-promotion. Yeah.
Oh.
I drew the cover and Neal inked it.
That's really neat. I like that a lot.
Little side story, when Jim and I went to Missouri on comic book hunts, that was one of the ones we found and made sure that we got. So
was continuity started by Neal Adams entirely? Did he owned it, or how did that work exactly?
If I remember right, it was kind of his art house for advertisement. For you know, that did graphic design and stuff like that for various companies, or, you know, anybody that would hire him. If I remember right, that was the way it initially started.
Yeah,
It-
him and Dick Giordano, and he had Gray Morrow work for him, and can't think of who some of the other people did. Yeah, they
It
did
looks like Michael
different
Netzer.
kinds of artwork.
It looks like Michael Netzer, Esteban Morodo, Bart Sears, Tom. Yeah, I can't talk today at all. Tom Grindberg, Richard Bennett, Dave Hoover, Mark Texera, Mike Diodato Jr., Vincent Alcazar, and Dan Barry. If Wikipedia is to be believed, which it usually is.
And so it was 80, 85, 86, I think, when they started doing
It
the,
looks like it was founded in 84 and then went out of business in 94. So it was
Okay.
around for about 10 years. Yeah,
So
I didn't even know it existed. I'm going to check that out.
So how much non-comic stuff did Neal do? Because I
Oh,
was surprised to see like he was put out so much material in the early to mid 70s and then really didn't do a lot of comic work after that, it didn't seem like. So was he doing a lot of commercial artwork, or?
that's again, that's what the obituary said, is that, and he just kind of had the Midas touch. And he was kind of fed up with, I don't want to say the comic industry, but the business side of it. And they said that was kind of how he, you know, really was able to bankroll stuff and you know, do well for himself, his family, and his company.
Yeah, it seems like he did a lot. I don't think he had a lot of idle days.
So you were asking other things that he did that maybe people wouldn't be aware of. I wasn't aware of this. Apparently, he did a lot of stuff in the. It looks like one of the runs of Dark Horse Presents.
Oh, really?
2011, 2014.
I think they have that listed under, he did, was that covers? Oh. No, that, sorry, it wasn't covers, it was interior stuff. Yeah. Volume 2, he did issues 1 through 3, 5 through 8, 11, and 29.
The thing I find kind of interesting going through a lot of the, you know, the bibliography is seeing just kind of the random, you know, one or two off things. He did All-Star Western, Savage Tales. He did some Vampirilla. Just like, you know, just a whole bunch of stuff. Weird Western Tales. Some Conan. It's just kind of, it's interesting how big an umbrella comic books are, and that you can just kind of do anything. There's just like so much room to just kind of do tons and tons of different stuff. Haunted Tales, The Creeps. He did a couple of romance comics, Monsters Unleashed. I think Monsters Unleashed had a lot of comic book artists. We did a little bit for them. Yeah, just it's kind of crazy how much stuff there is out there.
John, did he do your Conan book on record?
Yes, he did.
That's a great cover.
And again, that because when you think of Conan, you always think of
Buscema.
yes, and I don't remember. It was also a syndicated comic strip in the papers, but I don't remember if it was Buscema's art or Neal Adams' art for that particular story. That was in the Power Records.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, and it's got his the Adventures of the Fly, number 4. I was just looking through his bibliography and I finally got down to that one.
And you know, when you talk about the horror aspect, you know, Dead Man, even though he didn't create the character, to me, his artwork was the thing that really made me fascinated or really love Dead Man. And it's 3/4 horror is what Dead Man stuff is. The story plots have been.
Well, I think it almost kind of reminds me of where things are now, where people are kind of, originally superheroes were superheroes, but now we can do superheroes as heist films, superheroes as, political intrigue, superheroes as horror. I mean, that's, I don't know if Doctor Strange Multiverse of Matters is actually a horror movie, but it's like, it has some horror leanings, definitely.
It's horror-esque.
It's horrifying. But I think I think we should probably move on to George here in a minute. But I think I just wanted to kind of go around the horn one last time and see if anybody had any kind of closing thoughts on Neal before we move on. John, why don't we start off with you?
He really changed the industry, and he brought it from a bunch of old guys that did comics because it was a job. The first rank, and then when he came along, he was a fan that built on that. He worked very tirelessly for his family as well as the comic and art community. One of the things too that he brought to comics was more than just the 4 colors printing. Because that's what they did in the Sunday strips in the paper. And as soon as they found out that it wasn't any more expensive, they went ahead and jumped in and added more colors and that in the printing process. And again, back to his generation, and again, he inspired the next generation and continues to inspire.
And Clarke, I want to move on to you. And I should have asked this earlier, but do you have any personal experiences with Neal? Clarke?
I lost you there for a moment.
No, you're fine. So I meant to ask this earlier, and I didn't even think about it. Do you have any personal experiences with Neal? Did you know him and meet him in person?
Yeah. Neal was the one that kind of gave me my first shot into comic books. I'd done some little small pressy things and wasn't getting any real headway with either Marvel or DC. And then I heard that, the continuity stuff came out. So I gave them a call just to see what they looked at, if they looked at portfolios. And I talked with Chris Adams, Neal's daughter, and she said, yeah, on Wednesdays, we do portfolio reviews. And I said, well, unfortunately, I live in Iowa, not New York. So she said, well, just send us some stuff. I did. And I was working at the Cedar Rapids Gazette in the ad department there at the time. All of a sudden I got a phone call, that came over the PA system that I had to call. Neal personally called me at work and asked me if I would be interested to start doing some stuff for his company. And I said, absolutely. So he put Chris on the phone, and the next day I had the layout concepts for 2 Ms. Mystic covers. And I drew those, and that was kind of the way Neal worked. You did the story layouts, send the layouts in. Neal would go over them, make little changes that he felt were necessary, and then send it back, and then you pencil them and send the pages in. He was a great guy to work with. He was always available to talk to if you had a question. He was like you said, he was always there.
He seemed like somebody who very much knew what he wanted. And kind of a very much a clarity of vision on that.
Yeah.
Did you have any other thoughts or sort of closing out thoughts that you'd want to share or talk about?
I think the comic book industry would be almost non-existent right now if it wasn't for Neal. Neal really pushed helping artists out. Like John mentioned, it was kind of like this little group of guys to begin with, and you had to pay your dues to get in the door. There are stories about how he kind of like just walked by people, went right into Julie Schwartz's office and said, this guy told me to talk to you. Well, they said, well, you have to talk to Julie before you can get in here. And, he just walked down the hallway and went in the office, didn't even have an appointment, and got work. So, but he was always there if you had a question. Some guys today live in that little bit of fear that I don't want to have somebody work for me who can draw better than I do. Neal didn't seem to have that problem. He was always, there to help you with, if you had an anatomy problem, or if he saw your work and went, why aren't you drawing, comic books right now? Here, let me introduce you to these people. So there were people that I got to meet just because of Neal. So yeah, I think the whole industry would have went another direction if Neal hadn't have, if he just would have said, screw you guys, I'll go do something else.
So just off of that, this is something I've sort of understood about the very early comic book industry, is that there were a lot of people that were not drawing comics because they love comics. They were drawing comics because they were, commercial artists and were having a hard time either getting work in the industry or it wasn't paying enough. And so they were sort of doing comics as a way to kind of a stopgap way to fill their, pay rent and stuff.
Yeah, I've heard like Marty Nodell and a few of the other guys, Jerry Robinson, talked to some of those guys years and years ago, saying that comic books is where the guys who couldn't make it into the advertising industry went to. It was like, okay, here's your last shot at doing some kind of artwork, or you're going to have to just hang it up. So it wasn't exactly a first, that's what I want to do first. It was more like,
and so Neal Adams is like the first generation of people that were like, hey, I want to do that.
Yeah, I really want to do this. This is what I really love doing. I love telling stories and doing really good artwork that goes with it.
That's great. That's great. Jim, you have to follow that now.
Right.
What are some of your thoughts on Neal Adams?
I just am really impressed with how he's somebody who achieved fame and did something positive with it. He used his influence and prestige in the 70s to help out the creators of Superman, helped artists get their artwork rights back. I think that speaks volumes about what kind of person he was. And I also think, as a fan of comics, if Neal hadn't come along and did what he did to Batman, I think we all would have been robbed maybe of a tremendous character, because Batman was not Batman as we know him when Neal took over, and Denny O'Neil. So, the Joker being a homicidal maniac was not what was happening with the Joker for a lot of years before Neal and Denny took over.
So without Neal, we'd have one less psychopathic maniac.
Exactly. And where would we be then?
No, I think there's very little. There's nothing better you can say about somebody that they got famous and then did something good with it, because most people get famous and don't do anything good or do anything with it. So I think that's about the best thing you can say about somebody. That being said, I think we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, come back and talk about George Perez. Alrighty. Okay. Okay, and we're back. And now we're again, I think we're sort of two minds. We're celebrating a really great artist. Unfortunately, we're celebrating a great artist who just passed away. In this case, the man sitting just over this shoulder. I don't know how this works. George Perez. So George, I feel like really made his impact in both companies very, very firmly. I think Neal Adams did a lot of Marvel stuff, but I think most people probably remember his DC stuff primarily. I think it's the most famous of his stuff. Whereas Perez, it really depends on who you talk to. Like if you're an Avengers fan, then you definitely know George Perez from doing a lot of Avengers stuff. He did a ton of it. And if you are a fan of a little group of teenage titans, then you definitely know him from his DC stuff. Just briefly, George Perez is from Puerto Rico, but grew up in the Bronx. There's just something about being like a scamp in New York City that makes you want to draw superheroes. And I don't know what that is. I guess it's, of course, there's also people from Iowa that love drawing superheroes too. So maybe it's just being a scamp anywhere. He got his first published work in Astonishing Tales number 25, which I thought was kind of interesting because apparently he was doing, it was like a couple panels of satire or something. I wasn't quite clear on it. But that was also the first appearance of Deathlock. His first regular work was in, oh boy. Oh, it was in Deadly Hands of Kung Fu, starting with issue number 6. And that's where he starts getting regular work. And that we kind of talked about earlier. It's just this Kung Fu book that just had a ton of really, really great artists on it. And so again, as a Marvel person, I kind of know him primarily from the Avengers. That's my big experience. Even though my background is Teen Titans, go figure. So I don't know. Let's just start off. Where did you guys first start seeing George Perez's work? John, why don't you go first?
I remember from Fantastic Four, his run on that, and man, I cannot remember who the main artist was, but Joe Sennett was still inking it before, right before George came on. And again, you talk about different styles and that again, more realistic, I guess, in the anatomy and things like that. And oh my goodness, the detail in the backgrounds and the rubble and just the number of people in the background. When I think of the Fantastic Four, again, that wasn't the only thing that drew me in, but that's where I first remember him. And then when it came to when I found out about the Titans, I'd never even heard of them before, and I didn't realize that they'd been around as long as they had. And boy, that just totally, again, I'll use that phrase again, blew my mind with issue 1. But the first experience I had with the Titans, though, was in the DC Comics Present. What is it, 25?
26.
26. But his artwork was just incredible. And I still don't know how he's able to make Starfire an innocent looking porn star. That's the only way I can describe that. I meant, or, just,
Are you saying that you think her costume is a bit on the suggestive side?
Yes.
Just
but just a scotch. So, and again, I was a super fan after that, and then followed him. I followed him religiously, except for I didn't get into Wonder Woman, but I have some of those the runs, but
I didn't either. But everybody says his Wonder Woman run is just great. I've just never. Who was the writer when he was doing Wonder Woman?
I don't remember. He took over that though, didn't he?
Oh, did he?
I could be.
It looks like it starts off somebody named Greg Potter, but that's issue 1. I'd have to fast forward on a little bit and look and see. Oh yeah, apparently he did. I guess he was the writer writing it as well. So he was kind of doing a little bit of everything: artist, cover, inker, penciler. So
yeah,
that's got to be busy. That's got to be a lot of work. Clarke, so what was your first experience with George Perez in his artwork or writing?
It was when he started doing work on Avengers was when I first saw him there, and it was like I really liked his stuff. It was clean, it was crisp, lots of small panels with lots of people in them.
So how would you contrast, because I sort of contrast between Neal and George, and I feel like George isn't as photorealistic, but I think his artwork seems to have a very kind of a super feel, like everything is kind of a little bit larger than life, and I kind of like that about it. I don't think he was trying to be photorealistic. And he just kind of had a different take. Again, it's not a negative or positive. It's just kind of a different way of drawing. And I feel like I just get the sort of the larger than life feel. And I really liked his Avengers artwork, because it's like, it is realistic, but it's also better than realistic because it's bigger than realistic, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, he gave he didn't quite go for all the lighting effect and everything and all the shading that Neal would go through. George gave you more of that clean, crisp line work. And yeah, you're right. His superhero characters were all that, like, they were definitely the, the handsome guys, the gorgeous girls, if you didn't look like that, you weren't going to be a superhero. That's the kind of the world he was in. You weren't going to be 5'5" and weigh 195 pounds and be a superhero.
Apparently, when you get superhero powers, your acne just disappears overnight.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
A lot of George's stuff, you kind of went, yeah, I really want to be Nightwing, or I want to be this character because of, how good looking they were, and the way with like Nightwing, how he showed you his acrobatic skills, his gymnastics abilities and things like that. You were like, okay, he's not as dark as Batman. He's more like this,
that the action scenes when you talk about Nightwing moving on a page, I mean, you'd see him up here, then down here, then here. And I remember the Avengers watching the Beast bounce around, or Cap's shield. I don't remember a lot of artists ever doing that or seeing that the motion or the energy that he could put in those.
So Jim, what was your first experience with George Perez? Were you a DC or a Marvel?
I will say I was almost exclusively Marvel. I read a few random issues of his Avengers run early on, but one of my very first back issue comic buy was at a antique shop in Valley Junction, and I bought a pack tied with twine of early Amazing Spider-Man, and the other pack that I got was probably like the first 12 or 15 issues of his new Teen Titans run, and I was hooked. I thought, I love the artwork, I love the action, I love the storytelling. The characters were great. It was really, really good stuff.
So to explain to a heretic of DC, a Marvel extremist, so most of the characters, like George Perez created, who is it? I sort of wrote down the list. He created Starfire, Cyborg,
Raven.
Oh, he created Raven as well. It wasn't on my list, but most of the other characters in the new Teen Titans had already been pre-existing characters, and he just sort of rolled them together. So how did that work? Like, what was the storytelling like? What was the art like? Can you kind of talk about that a little bit? Open to the floor.
So, the Teen Titans had existed before, and it was basically a group of sidekicks. And then when Perez and Wolfman took over, they created these 3 new characters that weren't sidekicks. They were superheroes in their own right. They gave them a great antagonist with Deathstroke. One of the first issue with Deathstroke created a tragic event that made Deathstroke hate the Teen Titans for forever. So it was a great story set up because he's a recurring villain in their stories, and he's highly motivated to do mean things to them. So I very much like the new characters. The original Teen Titans I really didn't care about because I just thought, who wants to see Aqualad? And it was kind of the original Teen Titans run was kind of from before my time issues and kind of before Neal Adams brought DC storytelling into the modern age. And so the really not attractive stories to me. And this this reboot of the Titans was completely different. It also spent a fair amount of time, kind of like the Avengers. I assume his run on the Avengers was right before this. I think it probably influenced his storytelling with the Teen Titans. They spent a fair amount of time at the headquarters interacting with each other and leaving the headquarters to leave the regular lives, which, you know, kind of thing you didn't really see in Justice League. You know, in Justice League, the heavy hitters get together and they fight some cosmic threat.
They hit heavy.
What's that?
The heavy hitters get together and hit heavy.
Right. And there's not very much consideration for what is happening to them as people.
So I have a question about this. This is something that I just kind of, in doing the research for this, I think is kind of an interesting juxtaposition. You have George Perez kind of falls out with Marvel in 1980 and goes over to DC to do the new Teen Titans. Chris Claremont took over on the X-Men in February of 1981. And those books, well, obviously different characters, it sort of seems like in both instances, you have somebody kind of bringing in new blood. You know, most people forget that X-Men as a book was basically a failure. I mean, it was not popular. It was printing reprints for a long time. It was not a big book at all. And
Neal Adams couldn't even save it, right?
Right.
Yeah, no kidding. But so you have these two sort of at the time very young up and coming creators, in this case Chris Claremont and George Perez, taking over these books, where, you know, George Perez is kind of pulling it together with some characters that have been around for a while and adding some new ones, and Chris Claremont taking over a book that it was basically a kind of a flop and had just been kind of drug out for a bunch of years. And I'm not saying they're the same or maybe even similar, but it's sort of a similar storyline of, you know, bringing in a young creator to talk about young superheroes, and it's sort of a like kind of a fresh take, because I'm sure for a lot of people, the Avengers maybe seemed a little staid at that point, a little, you know, they're old and they, you know, they fight old guy villains. We want young superheroes fighting young guy villains.
So you brought up a really interesting point. I bet John and can add a little bit more to this, because I don't really remember all of the creators, but when George came over from the Avengers, he had just created Taskmaster.
Oh yeah. That's a big one.
And then he creates Deathstroke, who is not the same character, but pretty
similar.
close.
It's pretty similar.
I mean, the color scheme's the same, you know, the sword and guns and shield and everything is kind of the same.
And then Fabian Nicieza and somebody else whose name I can't remember created a character that was basically Deathstroke in the Marvel universe and called him Deadpool. I can never remember who that other person was. It's probably not important.
Right. But with the X-Men, when they rebooted the X-Men, was it Dave Cockrum that came over from DC?
Yes.
There was somebody that was working on
The
Legion, and he had a bunch of characters for the Legion and came over to Marvel and used the Legion characters as the new X-Men instead.
And that was Nightcrawler and Aurora, or Storm, and I forgot
Colossus
who else.
or
No, because Colossus is really kind of based on a Legion character from the 60s, Pharaoh Lad, who could turn into living iron. I'm trying to think who else.
but who can't these days?
That's right.
What about Warpath? No, I would assume not.
No, that was a original.
Did some of those reject Legion characters, were they used as the
Imperial Guard as well?
Yeah, I was going to ask the Imperial Guard, and who are the
Legion of Substitute Heroes.
No, I was gonna say the space guys that showed up in like issue 104 and 106. I can't remember their names.
I'm the Marvel guy, so don't look at me.
Come on, you're an X-Men fan.
Starjammers?
That's
Yeah, Starjammers.
that's what I was
Oh
saying. but it
wow,
was-
am I right? I just remember that. I remember the Starjammers mainly from the comic book. The Starjammers I always thought was kind of a strange one because they were like, it was kind of the X-Men's connection to space. Cause like, you know, the Avengers kind of already had all their space connections fairly early on. And I feel like they wanted to get, you know, I pledged by 1969, by the end of the decade, we will have an X-Men in space. We will have an
Well-
X-Men on Mars.
Well, I hope you get comfortable with it because that would be my guess for how the X-Men end up showing up. 'Cause
I mean, it's not.
we see the
not
Starjammers
impossible.
before we see the X-Men.
So I
I-
wanted
I
to
was-
just real quickly talk about one thing. So this is I wrote down the list of characters that George Perez either created or co-created, and I forgot Raven. So by the way, I forgot lots of characters he created. Like the list of characters he created and co-created is like longer than your arm. But the Anti-Monitor, Cheetah, which I was kind of surprised. I didn't know Cheetah started under his Wonder Woman run. That's impressive. Cyborg, Deathstroke, Hippolyta, Henry Peter Gyrick, who we talked about on our last episode, being kind of the big wet blanket on the Avengers for so many years. I always thought it was so strange that like Henry Peter Gyrick just always showing up to the Avengers, just be like, no, you can't do that, and like that's like his 90% of Henry Peter Gyrick's role in the Avengers, just like, hey, stop that, you can't do that. The Maestro, and I assume the Maestro is created by Peter David, but maybe I
Maybe co-created.
Maybe, yeah.
I guess must have. The Monitors, that's something that is DC entirely, and I don't know much about.
That's the from Crisis.
Okay, right.
He's the bad guy.
Starfire, White Tiger, and Taskmaster. So he has a very long list of created characters. And on top of that, there is 3 books that I would kind of like to talk about just briefly. The first one was one you just mentioned, Crisis on Infinite Earths. Obviously, was a huge book. And he did the art for that. So what are you guys' thoughts on Crisis on Infinite Earths?
So my memory is I was just finished basic training and was going to my electronics training class in at Chanute Air Force Base in Rantoul, Illinois. So
You
and
just
so
described like what is like statistically speaking the most boring sounding place on the face of the planet.
I was walking through the airport and there was a comic book rack, and all that was on the rack was Crisis of Infinite Earth, as well as what the handbook of DC Universe or whatever their thing. And I could not believe
Which George Perez did a lot of that too, I think.
yes, the cover stuff. But and I remember reading it not only twice but 3 times on the airplane. It was so good. And it was, and again, so packed with detail and, you know, little bits and, you know, of strange stuff from Charlton that were there. I recognized some of them, but I didn't know who all of them were. You know, the new characters were, you know, Harbinger and as well as Pariah and Lady Quark, and, you know, just, and again, yes, I know that Mark Wolfman, you know, wrote that, but again, just pounded home the strength and I guess the superness of all these characters. How many characters there were! I think the splash page alone, I think it had everybody from Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth S. I mean, it was just immense.
What it reminds me of is, you know, buying another book we're going to talk about just one second, where you just want to look at the splash page for like an hour. Like you just sit there, like look, it's like, oh, this guy's over here, and it's like it's just incredible. Clarke, were you a big fan of Crisis on Infinite Earths? Sorry, Clarke, were you a big fan of Crisis on Infinite Earths?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing.
No, you're fine. Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Christ. Did you say Crisis on Infinite Earth?
I did.
Okay,
one.
all right. Just making sure I'm on the right. I
That
did
one-
not
this
pick up
one
that book. I'm
Below
sorry.
me.
Yeah, right here. I didn't. It just wasn't something that really interests me to. I'm probably one of the very few people in the comic books that have never read Crisis on Infinite Earth.
Fair
I,
enough.
I looked through it. The artwork was absolutely fantastic, but I don't know. There was just something about it for me that just, I wasn't that interested in it.
Didn't like is it Wonder Boy or Superboy? Didn't Superboy like
Superboy.
rip somebody's arm off?
No, that was whatever the follow-up was 20 or 30 years later.
Infinite
okay.
Crisis, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Jim, you clearly have read this particular book.
Yeah. So when it first came out, it came out a similar time frame as Marvel Secret Wars. I've already established I'm a Marvel person first. I did buy a few of these issues because at the grocery store, they're just gorgeous covers, and I had to have some of them. And the artwork is just fantastic. At the time, I felt like the story was a little hard for me to penetrate. And I very much enjoyed how easy the story was to follow in Secret Wars. As an adult, going back and reading both of them, I think Crisis is a superior story.
I would agree. I think Secret Wars is fun, but it is clear it's not a particularly sophisticated storyline.
Right.
And I always wondered, and this, but I've always been a DC person, is that it seemed like, hey, DC's doing this. We need to do something like this. And
That
so
happens all the time, right?
yeah. And so they pump this thing out, really quick, is, story wise, because I think they could have been done in 6 issues instead of 12 with, there was a lot of side slippage I didn't think that they needed to do, but
So the other one I want to talk about, I'm kind of going through these a little bit quickly because there were so many books to talk about that we could be here all night. If there are 6 issues of comic books that made me a comic book fan, it is these 6, and that is the Infinity Gauntlet, which Perez drew a fair amount. Obviously Jim Starlin, and I sort of mentioned in the same breath as Crisis on Infinite Earths, not just because obviously George Perez drew both of them, or drew portions of them anyway, but that it's the same thing where I remember like it could take me just forever and a day to read those books, because like every time there was like these panels, there were just these crazy panels, and you just want to look at the panel and be like, wait a minute, who's that? What's he doing over there? Like, because there's all this stuff just kind of happening in the background, and it takes you forever just to like the words. That's quick, but the pictures takes forever to read. And it's just, I remember, Captain America punching Thanos in the face, totally kind of impotently because it doesn't do anything. It was one of my favorite, acts of resistance. It's great. Like he knows Thanos is going to kill him, but he's like, no, I'm going to punch him in the face one more time. And it was just, I don't know. That's just such a great book. What were you guys' experience with Infinity Gauntlet, John?
It's interesting that you reminded me that how much artwork he did in that, but I always, unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, I just think of Starlin's work on that. But again, that story needed his art because he can do so many, or so much detail, so many characters, and everybody has a purpose. Everything fits right, all of that, and that's what that needed, and that's really needed his artwork.
Well, what I think about is, so on my podcast, we were talking about the new Dune movie quite a bit last year, maybe more than we should have talked about the new Dune movie. But I think it is a fantastic movie, but it is nothing without the cinematographer. And essentially, Infinity Gauntlet, George Perez is the cinematographer. He's the one that shows it, because you can have the greatest story in the world, the greatest writer in the world, but if it's not being put across well, it's not going to be good. If that was just drawn by some random guy, doing stick figures, then maybe I don't like comic books today. Because that book is like, looking at the panels, looking at the splash pages and all this stuff is what got me interested. Because it's like there's tiny little stories happening inside the story that's just kind of in the back panel, and these things happening. And so you got Perez being the cinematographer for the whole thing, and he just brings it all to life. So I mean, Starlin's writing is fantastic, and you'll never hear me say a bad word about the guy. But his writing alone doesn't bring that book to life. Clarke, I guess what I'm saying is I like artists.
That's why we like comics.
Did you read Infinity Gauntlet, Clarke?
Did I what?
Did you read Infinity Gauntlet?
Let's see here. I'm sorry. I'm getting
you're
some
fine.
bad reception here. So
No, you're fine. You feel free to ask me to repeat. It's no big deal. Did you read Infinity Gauntlet? And because that's the one I was talking about that I love the art in so much.
no, I didn't read that one either. Some of these bigger, more epic things, I didn't do any because of there's so many. A lot of those had a lot of crossovers that had to
I
be
think
gone
Infinity
through.
Gauntlet was before the crossovers went totally crazy. I mean, I remember, what was the one where Asgard came to Earth, the Siege. And there's like literally 2 full books about the main book. And then there's like 14 different crossovers, and you're like, I don't know what to read. Infinity Gauntlet, I think, did have some crossovers, and there was some other stuff going on, but it's one of the reasons I like about it is you can just read those 6 issues. And I feel like for a comic event, 6 issues is just such a great length. Because now there's so many, there's like, oh, this is an 18-part, miniseries. Like I recently, I say recently in the last few years, reread the Maximum Carnage series for whatever reason. And it's like 18 issues. And you're reading through this thing, and it's like, this should have been 5 issues, like 6 issues max. And it's just, it just keeps going on and on and on. With Infinity Gauntlet, you got 6 issues. You set the character up, you get to fight the heroes. He has to fight the big heroes, and then they come back and blah, blah, blah. And it's a real tight for a big budget kind of event, comic book. It was a pretty tight story. And you don't need to read much before. I mean, because you can kind of pick up the context along the way. You don't need to read before. The 2 events that came afterwards, Infinity Crusade and Infinity War. And I don't remember which is which. I think it was Infinity War and then Infinity Crusade. I like those, but they're definitely, I don't think, quite on par with the original. I just think, and the art tells such a great story. So I would recommend it because you don't need to read any of the crossovers. I promise. You won't miss anything. Jim, do you have any thoughts on Avengers Infinity War? No, that's a movie. Infinity Gauntlet.
Yes, and you'll be shocked. I'm going to disagree with you. I think.
Can we mute his mic? We can mute him. Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a fine miniseries, but I was spoiled because I was a huge fan of that Silver Surfer run. That Thanos came back from the dead, and
Perez did a fair amount of work on that too.
And I started issue 1 and ended at issue 50, right around the Infinity Crisis, the Infinity Gauntlet event, and I just loved the teasing of Thanos, the setup for the Infinity Gauntlet, and I felt like I liked the tease better than the payoff.
By the way, Jim, we won't get Infinity Crisis until Walt Disney buys Warner Brothers and everything is owned by one company. And we finally get the Batman v Superman v Captain America v Iron Man v everybody else.
Right. So just to make a note on this, I think is interesting. So there's only a couple X-Men in this series,
Mhm.
and from what I understand, it's because Marvel kind of divided up their characters into little fiefdoms.
Oh yeah,
And
that was a
so
whole thing.
someone in particular was in charge of the X-Men characters, and so you had to get their approval to use the X-Men characters in your thing, and they let Perez have a couple X-Men, and that was it.
Clarke, do you remember that when they, because I know I don't even, was it I'm trying to remember the guy who had the X-Men, because it's a name you'd know and I can't think of it right off the top of my head. Where
Was
like
it-
there wasn't one editor in chief, there was like 5 editors over the different books. There was like an Avengers, X-Men, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and something else or something like I don't remember the exact breakdown of it. Clarke, do you remember that at all?
Yeah, I remember that both Marvel and DC kind of started doing that, the over editors. Like over at DC, Mike Carlin was in charge of everything Superman. And, you had different guys that were, and yeah, it was somewhat tricky because, like in some of the cases, if you all remember, Wolverine was like in dozens of comic books all over the place, but you couldn't get other characters. It was like, Wolverine was the marketing one that everybody pushed on everybody else to have in their comic books, or everybody else wanted them in his comic book. And yeah,
Wolverine got around. Wolverine got around.
Yeah, Wolverine, yeah, he did. And because I remember that at Marvel when I was there, that Nomad was like in nobody's group.
So you're saying he was like a
Nomad.
nomad?
Yeah, he was kind of like by himself, even there. He wasn't part of anything. He wasn't under anybody's umbrella. He wasn't an Avenger. He wasn't an X-Man. He wasn't,
So if you guys ever wanted to bring anybody in, did you have to like talk to, this editor or that editor? If you wanted to like, let's say you wanted to bring in, Dazzler. I don't know, Dazzler's going to fit into a Nomad book, but we'll make it work somehow. Would you have to go talk to like the X-Men editor before they'd allow you to do that?
Yeah, we actually did. We had to do that. And that's why Fabian and Glenn decided not to do anything like that. Now, we were entitled, we could get US Agent, but we actually couldn't get Captain America in the book, even though, Jack Monroe was the second Bucky, and he did the whole wore the blue Nomad outfit for a while as when Captain America went back to being Steve Rogers went back to being Captain America. Then Jack took over wearing that blue outfit. And then eventually when they brought the series back, they had him, the way I kind of designed the motorcycle guy look. But yeah, we were going to get a Captain America across there. Oh, we can't have Captain America because, they don't want him here. But we could do a story with US Agent, which is, kind of your Kmart version of
The Kirkland brand.
Captain America.
Well, I mean, even US Agents now has been, immortalized on screen, which I think is interesting. Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. And it definitely paints a strange picture of how Marvel was. Cause I'm assuming, so that's in the post Jim Shooter era, right?
Yeah, that was after Jim was there.
And everybody hated him.
Let's see who was running the show there. Tom
DeFalco?
Pardon me?
DeFalco or?
Let me see here. I gotta dig something up here. I don't even remember who was running the
I had gotten the impression there wasn't like an editor in chief at that point. They sort of got rid of the idea of the position of editor in chief, and it's sort of gone with these. Well, like you kind of mentioned, kind of like the fiefdoms, kind of like all kind of sort of co-editors in chief.
Yeah, it was kind of. Let me go to my credits page here.
which strikes me as being a very complicated way of running a publisher, where
Yeah.
there's nobody there that can just say yes or no to anything, because you have to
That
make
was
sure that
part of
everybody's
it,
on
yeah.
board.
Tom DeFalco was in charge, kind of.
Oh, you froze up, Clarke.
Well, let's go. We'll wait for Clarke to come back on. I wanted to mention, because I'm sort of leading up to something. So the third book that I wanted to talk about that I was kind of interested in, we talked about, Christ and Infinity Gauntlet. And so the third one we should talk about is JLA Avengers, because Perez drew the big crossover, which is one of those things that used to happen relatively regularly. I mean, that was something that wasn't unheard of. Green Lantern and was it Silver Surfer?
There was what, yeah, and that was the Kyle Rayner or
Right, yeah. And it was one of those things that it was pretty common until the industry got very, everybody got kind of territorial. Did you guys read that book? It was one of the there was like these twin siblings, and one represented Marvel and one represented DC, and there was like a shadow of both. And either I don't know if I'm telling this right at all. This is just my sort of vague recollection. And they were brought together, and then they did Amalgam. I don't think Perez did any of the Amalgam stuff. At least I didn't find any.
It seemed like the Jurgens, Dan Jurgens did a bunch of that.
That sounds familiar, but I wouldn't want to say for sure. Did you guys read the JLA Avengers stuff? I thought it was kind of fun. It's neat to see.
It was, but you know what? It felt like I was reading something from the 80s instead of, was it late 90s, early 2000 when that came out?
2004. I'm kind of with you on that. I didn't.
That was
really,
2004. Are you serious?
I think so.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I thought they were already pretty much gone their own ways at that point. JLA Avengers was, you are off by a year, but that's not much. It was 2003.
Oh yeah, September 2003. I was the other issue. I was looking at a later issue, but yeah, I didn't read it at the time when it came out. I got some of the issues a few years ago and looked at them. I didn't really read them. I kind of looked at the pictures. I thought some of it was interesting, but yeah, in retrospect, Marvel had kind of started doing a lot better storytelling at about this time. So it does seem much more like a late 90s, early 90s, late 80s story.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that, because when I found this, I thought I had discovered something amazing that had come out, 25 years before I found it. I think I bought these in probably 2015, 2016. So like at that point, they were only like 13 years old. I thought this was like from the 90s.
Right. It looks like it.
And the thing to remember that Crisis of Infinite Earth, that storyline was really what JLA Avengers crossover was supposed to be. Because originally it had the Monitor, it really had, there was a fusion that happened,
Oh, I did not pick up on that. I
The
had
fusion was Amalgam, right? Or was it?
No.
Amalgam.
Well, what I mean a fusion is that it's not that the heroes merge together, is that the worlds merge together. So it was the Justice Avengers or something like that. And so the lineup was Superman and Thor and
okay.
And Hawkeye instead of Green Arrow, and things like that.
So by the way, John, you are bright red. We just need to acknowledge that you are in fact a
I think
super
somebody
villain.
made him angry.
I am the Red Hulk, the Red Bulk.
You wouldn't like me when I'm hungry. So then was Amalgam earlier? Was Amalgam like in the 90s then?
Yes, but the JLA Avengers thing was something that was from the late 80s, or something that they'd started, and then it got shut down because they weren't wanting to do crossovers like that. And then the first crossover that they had since that debacle was the amalgam stuff. And that was why did that go red? That is so weird. I don't know why it was such a.
By the way, Dark Claw is the most 90s character that you could possibly make up.
What about Night Thrasher?
No, I mean, come on. Batman and Wolverine together, there's just nothing. You can't do anything with it. It's like that's it. That's the pinnacle. It's the pinnacle of the 90s. Like, what if Batman had Wolverine's claws? Like, people said that like 40,000 times before that book came out, and finally they were like, okay, fine, let's give Batman Wolverine's claws because reasons. That being said, I think I've gone through a bunch of these. I also wanted to mention just kind of some of the books that Perez worked on. Again, it's just kind of crazy, all these different books that the people working over the career. So Fantastic Four, Silver Surfer. By the way, Jim, I apologize. He did work on Silver Surfer, but it wasn't until after Infinity Gauntlet. It was a fair amount.
He worked on it way late, like
it was like in 100 to like 112 or something like that.
Yeah.
He did like 18 issues. Batman, The Flash, Superman, JSA, iBots. Any takers? iBots.
I think
Okay.
that was
on iBots.
that was like an independent book, I think.
I think it was, yeah. Solus, Sirens, which was another big book that it was a creator-owned book that he did. Green Lantern, Inhumans, Green Arrow, The Defenders, Thor, Thunder Agents, Maestro, Captain America, Iron Man, Warlock, Monsters Unleashed, and without a doubt, the most important book, Kiss.
He did the Kiss issue with their blood in the ink.
I don't know if it was that one. I'm not 100% sure.
I
gotta go
have
back
to
and-
check now. I
I'm
can
looking for it
tell.
again. I had it up. The Maestro stuff. I think Maestro is a really cool character. I've never read that many books with him in it, but yeah, 2 issues. Marvel Comics Super Special Kiss.
I have those issues.
Issues 4 and issue 7. I don't know if either of those were the blood issues, but
Number
yeah.
1 is the blood issue.
Okay, there you go.
I was going to
Oh,
say
these were Kiss. So Kiss was it's Marvel Comics Super Special is the run, and Kiss was just the first issue. So they're actually about different bands, I think, because the one he did the Beatles story, which is number 4,
Yeah.
and number 7, which was another Beatles
Also-
story.
Also the Beatles.
Yeah, Sgt. Pepper's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it looks like Alan Weiss did the pencils for the Kiss issue. And Steven Gerber did the scripts for that. I happened to get that at Half Price Books about 10 years ago.
Did they know what
I
they
hope
had?
you were tested afterwards.
Did they know what they had? I mean,
Yeah, it was behind the counter, but
okay.
you know, I got it with one of those like 40% off coupons or whatever. So it was all right.
Is that issue like worth money?
Yeah. Like $80, $100.
Oh, Sal Buscema did the art too. It lists Sal Buscema as an artist. And John, that's weird. Going through sometimes going through these things and different people are listed, and it's like you actually have to look in there because this lists Sal and John as the artists. Alan Weiss is the penciler. I don't understand how that works. It's fine. we're far afield. I apologize. So that's kind of all the stuff I had written down. Did you guys kind of have any final thoughts? I hope we get Clarke back before we log off, but
Oh shoot. Hopefully I missed the. There we go. Sorry about that. I missed the thing that you were in the waiting room. I'm sorry about that.
You just gotta punch him
Okay.
right in the ribs.
Hooray.
Well, Clarke, we're kind of closing out now. I was just gonna have John, why don't you give us some final thoughts on Perez's work? Like what sort of turned you on to him? What was some of your favorite works? Just all of it.
Again, just his work was bright. It was crisp. how you wanted the world to be, or how you wanted to be. Again, with the superheroes, I met him 1.5 times, and he was really nice, and very friendly. And why I say half is that when he was on his final tour to at C2E2 a few years ago, I couldn't get in the line, but he was sitting right next to Marv Wolfman, which was easy to get into his line. So I was there, and then kind of slid over and said hi. But but that's the halftime that I met him. But where I'm going with that is that again, I know I only met him just that little bit of time, but again, he was able to genuinely connect, and you can't fake that. So was a genuine person, or was a genuine person. And again, he's affected generations, or will affect generations with his visual style as well as his storytelling.
Absolutely. Yeah, I met him in St. Louis, actually, very little convention down there. And I thought he was unbelievably nice. Like, just one of the nicest people that I've ever met in the industry. And I was very impressed with him. And I got one of his Thanos is in my little Thanos book. Jim, what final thoughts do you have? Any other books that we didn't talk about, or any other things that we didn't talk about that you think deserve mention?
I'm just going to mention a couple new Teen Titans storylines. Around issue 25 in the new Teen Titans run, Starfire has a conflict with her sister Blackfire, and it's in space. It's a little off the wall, but I love the artwork. I love the storytelling. The issues were all fantastic reads. The other one in the Teen Titans is the Judas contract. Again, Deathstroke comes back, and people die. Some heroes leave, some heroes come back. It's a really, really great storyline that people need to check out.
That sounds great. And there is a Titans television show, which got 2 seasons, I think, or 3 seasons.
Maybe 3.
I got up to the 2nd season. I like it. I think it's one of those things. I think it suffered from them trying to do Titans on a bit of a budget. And I think it's sometimes like they could have just spent a little bit more money, and I think it would have looked a little better, but it's definitely worth watching. I thought it was a good show.
So I felt like there were really good episodes and really bad episodes. It just seemed really like a spotty show.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And with the Titan show, sometimes it was a little too CW.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
And Clarke, I again, I forgot to ask this till the end last time, and I'm going to forget to do it to them this time. So did you have any personal experience with George, or did you know him in person or meet him in person a bunch?
I got to meet him a couple of times. The time I got to spend most time with him was at a Kansas City show. This was in fact before it became Planet Comic-Con. It was the Kansas City comic book show. He was one of the guests they brought in, and I got to hang. My table was right next to his, and so we got to talk. And he's just a fun guy to talk to. He's one of those guys that had, interesting stories. And I just, I love the fact that when I'd heard him admit that in some cases that I know they showed that picture behind him, they saw him at a drawing board, but he did admit that he spent a lot of time laying on the couch drawing the comic book. He just taped the paper to a lap board and just sat there and while he was watching television. And quite a few of us that work at home actually do have the TV on when we're doing our work.
As somebody who also works from home, I'm going to go ahead and plead the 5th. No, that's great. He seemed like one of the more genuine people in comics. Like I think there's some people that get into the industry and get a little bit of success and sort of begin to believe their own press and get a little too big for everybody. And I don't think that was him. All those interactions that I ever saw him have with anybody were very, very genuine and very like he's kind of a bubbly guy. He was just like a really, like to talk and like to, interact and just
Yeah, and he,
genuinely
like
had fun
talk
with it.
about other things than comic books.
Right.
Some guys who, like you said, they kind of like buy into their own press. They kind of turn into celebrities and want to be kind of treated that way. George just wanted to be treated as one of the guys. And I will say that one illustration that's behind you right now, they picked one of his least wild shirts that I saw him wear over the years. He had quite a collection of the Hawaiian styled shirts.
It's a good trademark to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a picture with him. If I can find it, I'll see if we can't edit it in. I don't know if you guys get pictures with him too, but if I can find it, I will. Although it's hard to find pictures now that you've taken. Like we got so many pictures on our phones now, and you can't find any of them.
Which old computer is it on?
Yeah. That being said, I think that it's one of these things. It's a sad occasion because we've lost these creators, but at the same time, they left a huge body of work that's always going to be with us. So, right now I'm into films, and so I've been recently going through David Cronenberg's filmography, which is a very unique filmography, and it's sort of you go through an artist's catalog, and you're like, this is always going to be here. We're always going to have this. So even when we lose people, they're still there. They've still got their art is still there. And these are both artists that put themselves in their art. And so they're always going to be there to some degree. And I think it's sad that they're gone, but we'll always have that part of them.
Very true.
On that note, I want to thank everybody for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. And thank you for joining us.
Just a reminder that we'll meet again in 1 month. And the topic will be our top 5 villains of all time.
Well, that's going to be a list. It's going to be tough to put together.
I'll give you a spoiler. Joker is not on my list.
He's not on mine either. Jim, do you have any words from our sponsor?
I do not.
Well, tonight's episode was brought to you by LexCorp. Whether it's food fillings, whether it's machines, whether it's government contracts and weapons, the world is in his hands. LexCorp.
That makes me warm and fuzzy.
Also brought to you by rum. You don't need it, but it certainly makes the world a little better. All right. Thanks, guys.